Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits. Today's exciting episode is with Ilya from Near Protocol. So we're very excited to have him. I think this is a very advanced and developer-friendly platform, so I think we're looking forward to learning a lot more about it. So I guess without further ado, Ilya, welcome to Miko Bits show.
Thanks, Mika. Thanks for inviting.
Of course. So I think that uh, the opening question I always like to have is sort of what problem is solved. But I think that in a sense, as a platform technology, with a layer one, it's a very broad set of problems. So I guess what I would love to have you do instead is really just describe to a naive but blockchain informed audience. How would you describe near?
For sure, yeah. I mean, I actually think the problem that we're trying to solve is a little bit like it's relevant to what everyone else is solving, but we do have our own kind of, I would say, notes that we believe in.
Yeah.
And kind of from high level, our approach in general is about kind of making a infrastructure and a platform that kind of mass adoption application can actually be built on, right? And so kind of our origin story is, us actually trying to build something on Ethereum and realizing that like it's not possible even at like back then at way lower prices and way lower kind of um, demand that was back then, and really trying to focus on how do we build kind of a developer platforms that developers are excited, to build on kind of innovative solutions. How to build a platform infrastructure, a blockchain that normal users, right, people who do not know what private keys are, can kind of just pick it up and use, right? And obviously, kind of the scalability issues is the thing that everybody's talking about. Like that's just a part of the story because like developers should not worry about that. The capacity of their network will run out after some application hits mainstream. So really kind of how do we solve these problems and provide something that is like friendly, like, and actually introduces like these concepts that we all believe in to mass adoption in a way that really provides a better product. So really kind of product focused, vision of the future of like Web3 becoming kind of dominant platform, but through better products, not just philosophy.
That's very good. What I would love to understand from you is, you mentioned that you began your journey with the efforts to build on top of Ethereum. So I would love to kind of have you explain a little bit about your vision about the future of blockchain, right? And I mean, it seems like multi-chain is inevitable, but I guess I'd love to kind of have your understanding of, how it evolves from here, and how blockchain as a whole evolves, obviously including near.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are kind of few different levels here. I think the a little bit more than just blockchain. I think like in general, the decentralized technologies, right, will be powering uh, kind of future of software. And one of the core reasons why I believe in that is because by giving control back to the user, by giving control back to the kind of business or whoever generates and controls the original kind of data and action, um, you actually allowing all the applications, all the things to cooperate, to interact, right? And the decentralization is your guarantees that all those things will actually work together, right? The open source, open state, all those things that we kind of really like to say, like those are guarantees of really things working for the user. And so this is just a better way to build software. This is a better way to build applications. And like it's the same way how like open source was like a crazy idea, 15 years ago, and then people started doing it, and then now it's almost like it's not just mainstream, right? Actually, like even big companies who usually would try to say everything actually open source big parts of their stack because like that's a better way to build software. And so what we see in this decentralized kind of world is a new generation of this. And so if we assume that, right, what is the blockchain's role in this ecosystem, right? And the blockchains are kind of source of truth. They are, computers and source of truth. And like, it's a combination of things. It's also a bank. It's kind of a whole ecosystem of things. And so different blockchains obviously have a little bit different focus on, and it end up serving different parts of this ecosystem, right? So we see things like Ethereum, which became kind of this like financial, like high value financial ecosystem, right?
Yep.
And I don't think this is going anywhere in next like 5 years. And then we see things like Filecoin and Saya and others, which are and Arviv, that are serving the storage, like the storing data in this decentralized ecosystem. And then we still kind of with Ethereum, the idea is that it showed us the way what we can do, right? Like kind of the imagination, especially in 17, went almost very wild, right? Everybody was like, hey, we can do this and that. It was like super cool. And then we hit the reality, which is like the infrastructure and the way everything is structured is almost impossible to kind of actually bring uh, use cases that people were imagining. And so, kind of what we believe in is building that like kind of infrastructure for innovation, right? Place where you can build next wave of social network, and they will not look exactly like Facebook on chain. There'll be something different, something with crypto in mind, something with communities in mind, something with investment and asset management in mind. But it kind of will be gathering together millions and ideally billions of people, right? So that's what we're kind of building toward. And so that's kind of how I see like there's different levels of stack at the end that form in this decentralized world, right? And I think it's very exciting that like working together with everyone kind of to build up this whole ecosystem.
So, how do you see sort of the evolution of kind of a multi chain? Like, do you see something, how do you see something like a Polkadot or a, IBC Cosmos, or how do you see something like layer twos? So, like, how do you see, and, obviously those are interop questions in part, but, in other part, it's really about kind of the programming model as well as the interop model. So I would love to understand your perspective.
Yeah, my perspective is, I would say, changing from time to time. I
For
think
sure.
there's kind of there's few things that I believe in. One is that there's a huge value in a kind of single, ready to use platform, like smart contract platform, right? Ethereum have shown us like how easy it can be, like especially if you're using testnet to just launch applications and everybody starts to like join in and start using it because everybody already has an account, everybody already has assets, they know how to use it, and things work together. And so, like the way I like to compare this is, you know, like Polkadot and Cosmos, kind of the general approach is to, go and build your own data center, right? You start from scratch, and yes, they have like a guide, and they have all the tools. They like ship you the car with all the parts, but you still need to put it together. Still need to put power in. You still need to have some people on prem to like monitor that everything running. Or some like kind of the idea of the smart contract chain is this idea of Amazon Web Services. You just come in and just launch your application and it runs, and it uses like the amount of resources it needs to serve its customer. There is times when you do need your own data center, right? Like it's Facebook, for example, will not be running on the AWS. Um, but that time is probably not when you're a startup, but more when you already an established company.
Sure.
And so from my perspective, I see kind of more times where people would transition actually from like places like Ethereum and Near to having their own um, chain when they're becoming big enough, and they do need to customize kind of things, and they do need maybe a little bit different way of interacting with the user. So that's like, I would say there will be a transition, and there will be like a kind of, depending on demands, people will choose just different things. But I would say like I would expect 80% of kind of applications to live on smart contract chains, and then kind of 20% of use cases will have their own app chains.
Yeah, interesting. So I want to kind of get into the killer applications because you talked about things like mass adoption. Obviously, mass adoption requires tremendous performance and scalability, which I think you're offering. But I would love to understand what you think would be kind of a perfect killer applications. You mentioned social networks. I think tell me about kind of your vision, as well as any possible, projects that you're helping to spawn.
For sure, yeah. I think the one of the interesting things about like I think like in general I see kind of this initial development of use cases in blockchain world as the like a triangle of three core, let's say, markets. One of them is financial markets, right? This is where we have DeFi right now, and DeFi kind of got its killer app plus, right?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of an ecosystem of applications that are dealing with different levels of like leverage and trading and lending and borrowing, right? And so kind of this is evolving. Obviously, Ethereum is took a very clear place where people issue assets and do a lot of kind of initial things. But at the same time, we see kind of the prices and in general capacity issues that like most of people cannot participate actively in this financial markets. So this still will has a place on something more scalable, and there's like kind of one of the things that we actually recently launched is a bridge from Ethereum to Near, which allows to transfer assets kind of between the two blockchains in a very kind of transparent way, and most importantly in a trustless way. It's not violating any of the security guarantees of these two networks. And the second side of this is I call it a kind of a creator side. So creator side, we see a more general pattern, not just in crypto, but like in the world in general, a transition from kind of people doing like gig economy to what is called passion economy, right? People actually want to do like what they like to do, what they're passionate about, and earn money from that. And blockchain kind of, especially for digitally native things, is one of the best places because you have access to this huge market of people who are crypto rich from all this trading to actually participate in this economy of the creators. And the third part is where the social part comes in. This is where communities and kind of interactions between people and social come in, because this is and like usually like I call it DAOs, right? So DAOs is a tool, but like from my perspective, DAOs is the social network of the crypto, right? This is how like on chain, how in crypto we can form communities, interact with each other, have kind of underneath a value, a token, an assets, an investment, work done, a bounties, like whatever you can layer on top of it. But like this is a new way of interacting. It's almost like more fluid. Like right now you have like communities on Facebook, which are just kind of no money involved, no nothing, and maybe like some people sending PayPal stuff. Like, I mean, some people hacking around that. And then you have a company, right? A formal companies that you created
Yep.
with like, US government. And this is two very like kind of different sides of the spectrum, but like there's a huge spectrum between, right? I mean, obviously there's like LLCs, but like in general you can create like all kinds of different interactions where different communities can do work for another communities. You can invest together, you can buy NFTs together, you can sell NFTs together, like all of this kind of stuff that you can start by doing in this like digital economy. And so kind of between these three things, right, of pretty much the financial operations, right? Open finance,
Mm-hmm.
DeFi, the creator NFT kind of ability to offer your digital creations to people around the world and actually like participate in this economy. And the third, and kind of the DAO infrastructure to allow for people to come together and kind of organize around these things is kind of, I would say, like a killer reinforcement cycle, because it actually uh, allows us to grow and bring more people in, because people can make money, people can organize and socialize and kind of feel like they're creating something, not just purely trading, but actually participating in this economy.
Yeah, it's a very synergistic kind of a sort of metaverse economy type of mindset, right? Where all of these kind
Exactly.
of corporate structure and organizational structure and then payments and then, everything, right? And then objects, right? So, I think it makes what you're saying makes a ton of sense and it's very exciting. I'd love to kind of dig into Rainbow Bridge. I mean, obviously it's bridging between Ethereum and Near in a trustless fashion, decentralized fashion. Would love to understand a bit more about the kind of mechanism, right? Because obviously, the trustless bridges are pretty rare, and so this is something to study in the wild. So please help us understand it.
Yeah, for sure. One of the like kind of the underlying design of things, right, is this idea that um, pretty much each blockchain needs to verify the other blockchain, and like doing a full verification is almost impossible. But there's this thing called light client. So light client verification is the ability to verify the security of the blockchain, right? So if the security is kind of correct, then we assume that all the other pieces of the blockchain is correct as well. And so this is what, for example, your some of the more advanced wallets are doing, right? So if you have a Ethereum wallet, for example, some of them, most of them actually just relying on a centralized party, but some of them are verifying the blockchain security. And this way they can be sure that, the amount of money that you just received is correct. And pretty much what we've done, we implemented kind of this light client verification of Ethereum on Near and of Near on Ethereum, right? So this is two smart contracts that run on these two chains, and they pretty much like almost uh, kind of download the blocks and verify them and make sure block headers and verify them and make sure that they're correct. And so this way, you actually have kind of a access to all of the block information, block header information inside the other chain. And so that gives you pretty much almost unlimited possibility of doing things kind of while relying on the security of this chain. You can read the kind of the transactions, you can read the state of the blockchain, you can kind of act on top of it, right? And uh, so the way the Rainbow Bridge is built is kind of it relies on this light client at the bottom, and then there
Yep.
is like few different components that allow to developers to build up custom ways of how they want to interact these two blockchains to interact. So pretty much by building kind of two contracts on either side, you can now program how things can communicate to each other. So it's almost like a generic way of reading what the other blockchain is, talking about, or like what's going on there, and then
Yeah.
acting on top of it, and then you connect things between this way.
So the programming model though is like, tell me about the programming model, the container, the VM. Like how does what are the various languages, or how do you develop on Near?
Sure, yeah. So Near is kind of from the start we were trying to uh, gear toward more like wide developer adoption, right? And to do that, we decided to go with something that is actually widely used. And so this is thing called WebAssembly. So WebAssembly actually runs in every single browser, and
Yeah, yeah,
there's kind of
Wasm.
more and more, yeah, use cases around it. And so there's few actually like robust compilers, and there's a lot more in progress. So the idea is that we don't need to build every single support for every single language, or like build more languages. There's a way wider community that is working on that. And so the thing that works right now is Rust. So that's kind of our primary choice. And this in blockchain in general, Rust became like one of the kind of go-to because of its like kind of correctness, like way to write correct code.
Mm-hmm.
um, we also support so-called assembly script. So assembly script is a JavaScript with TypeScript compiler for WebAssembly. So it allows you to write like almost like in TypeScript and then compile it and run it. So that's also supported. And there's other languages that are in progress, everything from like Kotlin to Go to a bunch of others that can be like integrated over time as well. So kind of the idea is like in general, we want the community to be able to write in any language, and over time, like this will be possible. And right now, Rust and kind of assembly script are the main ones. And on top of it,
what about Solidity?
Solidity. Yeah, that's a great question. So one on top of this, yeah, Solidity is interesting because EVM is actually designed very differently from how Near works, right? As I mentioned, like we're designed for user experience, so we've done a lot of different things differently to kind of gear toward user. So our account, for example, is very differently structured, which allows to create all kinds of experiences where users don't even know there's like private keys and public keys are happening. But there's a lot of people who, there's a lot of code already in Solidity, and there's a lot of people who are familiar with this flow. And so actually, a little bit less than a month ago, we launched a kind of EVM compatibility support called Aurora. And so the way it works is actually a smart contract on Near that pretty much it knows how to accept Ethereum transactions and process them, and internally maintains pretty much all of the Ethereum state. And that also shows you how powerful Near WebAssembly runtime is, because we literally just took a Rust written EVM implementation, compiled it, and with some obviously wrapper, ran it as a smart contract on Near. So you can take existing code, right, that's written for some other
Yep.
environments and run it as a smart contract. And so this allows, like Aurora allows pretty much existing Solidity contracts to just run one-to-one, no changes required in this new environment on Near, and get like 1 second finality, 1 second blocks, 2 second finality, 1 cent transaction fees kind of for free.
So if a developer is able to port kind of EVM Solidity and run it on Aurora, and if they're able to have tokenized crossing of a trustless Rainbow Bridge, then they could even use Near like an L2.
Exactly, yeah. So we call Aurora Ethereum's L2, because it's pretty much like with bridge and with EVM, it actually, some users may not even know they're using Near. Like Aurora on its own, pretty much kind of on that level will kind of hide everything. You're paying fees in Ether, you kind of interacting with through MetaMask, using the same front ends for
That's
the
quite
apps. So
shocking, actually, right? Because that suggests a mode of use that's quite different from something like a Matic or Polygon, right? It's quite different in usage, right? Because people can just cross seamlessly and avail themselves of a better performance environment.
to some extent, yeah. I mean, I think like there are some similarities, but yeah, we've done a lot of work to make it almost zero, like zero changes required for compatibility, including on front end side. So you can, you can think of it as just way faster, way cheaper Ethereum that you
Have
can
you
interact with.
have you spoken with kind of AMM slash derivatives exchange or decentralized exchange providers? Like it feels like there's a natural killer application here, especially when if people can transparently cross the bridge.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So there are quite a few of them are interested in Aurora and are pretty much in active conversations as like final kind of, and already testing some stuff out. Like there's definitely already like few AMMs that are testing on testnet right now.
Yeah, it feels like that kind of level of transparency is sort of a killer application because it doesn't other systems don't behave anywhere near with that level of usability.
That's a goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about sort of you mentioned the Rainbow Bridge. Like I'm wondering if you're envisioning other bridges too, right? So how do you see the future of bridges into the near world? Because there are obviously a large number of different blockchains.
So in general, Rainbow Bridge is actually a generic protocol. So this idea of using light clients and kind of we call them provers and connectors is actually works almost for any other blockchain that has some kind of smart contract like logic on it. So the only thing that you cannot connect that way is Bitcoin like chains. But yeah, if we're talking about like Cosmos, for example, so any Ethereum like EVM compatible blockchain is easy. So like Matic, BSC, all of those chains, like totally possible. I was actually just tweeting like a few days ago, if somebody wants to build like to kind of convert Rainbow Bridge for BSC, and there's already someone looking into that. So that is totally possible. And then we're working with some partners on IBC, like connecting pretty much Rainbow and IBC kind of in one as well. So it's definitely possible, and kind of very interested to kind of connect the ecosystem together. Like one of our strengths is in general, because we're like, with 1 second blocks, like as far as I know, and then like 2 second finality, we like probably fastest finality. And so this actually allows a lot of other folks to use Near as a settlement and kind of the intermediary, even if they want to go from Ethereum, for example, to the other blockchain. Because we already have the Rainbow Bridge, you already have a trusted link here. You don't need to create your own trusted link and kind of pay for that and operate that. And so there's kind of a lot of interest in doing this, like using Near as a hub for some of these interactions.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, I definitely see the excitement there. I mean, it feels to me though like the non-Ethereum like chains might there might be a way to do trustful bridging, right? So there, obviously you may not be the provider necessarily, but it feels like those chains will want kind of some degree of cross pollination. But the thing that's really funny about the emergence of multiple chain bridges into something like a Near is that you start to sort of fulfill some of the vision of what Polkadot is promoting. So I'm curious what your views are, right? Because when you think about Polkadot, you definitely start to think about like WASM, and you start to think about sort of this vision of these various kind of bridges and worlds of that nature. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, again, from my perspective, we're all kind of operating in the bigger world of, decentralized kind of technologies, and we're all trying to build, what are the pieces that needed to function. So I would say we do a lot of things that, Polkadot have talked about. We do a lot of things that Ethereum 2 have talked about before. So actually, Aurora is the first example of execution environments that Ethereum Foundation researchers have talked about like 2-3 years ago, right? Because it actually runs a completely new kind of like another chain's execution environment on top of an existing blockchain. So I think like a lot of these concepts, like, because as I said, like Near is infrastructure for innovation, we can really quickly prototype and build in and see how they kind of execute and work. So I would say, kind of all in all, yes, and I'm excited to kind of keep building this like new evolutions of this across the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, that's really amazing and dazzling technical achievement. How do you see sort of it feels to me like we were just talking about Binance Smart Chain, right? So if you look at Binance as a centralized exchange with BSC, right? And then you look at something like FTX, right, which is sort of a centralized exchange with Solana and Serum, right? So in a sense, there seem to be these kind of odd sort of pairings of centralized and decentralized solutions. Like how do you envision this kind of world, this future world, and how does centralization kind of play a role? Like, do you see those as being temporary solutions in favor of decentralization, or how do you see this evolution? Because it feels like the state of the art today is these kind of hybrid solutions.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now the hybrid is very powerful because kind of the access of the user right now is always starts with a centralized exchange, right? One way or another, if the user wants to come into this ecosystem, they
They
need to
do.
start.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things we've been actually really interested to address, actually, with what we were working with, what we wanted to build on Ethereum in the first place. And actually we have it running right now. So in general, I think like right now, that's a pretty kind of clear case that this is happening and this is needed. Like same as like, Coinbase being like, a huge IPO is actually huge for our industry, even though it's like, one of the most centralized companies,
For sure.
but like it actually, moves and powers our ecosystem and kind of provides this gateway. I think like over time, as more economy is originating from crypto, as more economy you know, is in crypto in the first place, like these things, and more things are linked, maybe like the private kind of like enterprise stuff is also linked into these blockchains kind of more directly, there might be more, like there might be less need in these gateways pretty much, like uh, to kind of to let people in and out from the
Yeah, yeah,
ecosystem.
on
So,
ramps
but
and off
that'll
ramps.
take, yeah, but that will take obviously some time. Yeah, I think like why I'm excited about like creators, and also so like the thing I wanted to mention was, so the thing we started with was a data crowdsourcing platform. So we were doing an AI project, and we were actually having a bunch of people doing work for us across the world, and we had a ton of problem paying them in fiat, right? We were trying to send them dollars from US
Wow.
to China, Russia, Cuba, and all those countries have like ton of problems with US, for example,
Yes,
right?
for sure.
And and so we were looking at Ethereum back then as a way to build our kind of protocol for crowdsourcing back then,
So
because in
interesting.
a way this is a way for people to start earning in the crypto ecosystem from scratch, right, from zero. Like you don't
Yeah.
need to have crypto to start earning.
Yes.
And so actually this has been launched for 2 months now on Near, and there's like I think like thousands of people now have earned for their first crypto through that process, through this crowdsourcing platform called Near
That's
Crowd.
cool.
And actually they just launched, I think like a week ago, a version for India specifically as well, to support people in India to kind of be able to work from home and don't need to go anywhere
Amazing.
and stay safe. And so I think like that is like that, and Minbases and Parasis, like platforms that allow people to create like either something of their passion or skill, or maybe not even not skillful work, to start earning in crypto. And so your economy right away becomes in crypto, and then you can use this money to like invest. You can use this money to maybe pay for education, to kind of earn some skills, maybe to learn how to some of the passion skills that you want to have. And so through that kind of almost like building this, I call it a supply chain of like a digital supply chain in
Yeah.
crypto. We can actually start having people who are native into this ecosystem, and then they are kind of just living here. And so like one other project that we have is called Sputnik DAO. And so this is the DAO infrastructure, which what it allows to do is for people to kind of get together, like build communities, and then operate with money as a community. And so you can now start earning as a like small group. For example, our friends can come in and go to another DAO and say, hey, we'll do some work for you, like give us some some of the crypto for that. Or you can also request some work to be done, right? So you can start creating this kind of almost like companies and economies in this like fully digital way. And so all of those pieces, right, like you can see how they all kind of forming this like digital economy, digital native economy, and kind of span from there.
That's interesting. So, I mean, one of the things that comes up in that build out is sort of things about intellectual property, right? And ultimately things like NFTs. So, I guess I'd love to understand what you have with respect to kind of NFTs, and how do you see the future of NFT, especially on Near.
For sure, yeah. I think right now, kind of most of the focus is around kind of art, different forms of art. I mean, the kind of the image things has been the first. I mean, there's a lot of music now that people explore, and I think that's just the beginning, because it's probably the easiest thing to kind of conceptualize as like a as a collectible item, or as an item that people can value. But there's a lot of more interesting things that kind of expand from there. But just for a second to focus there, so we have one of the earliest apps that launched is Paras, and so this is a digital card uh, platform. And so actually, so they launched, there was some already first kind of artists from Philippines, from Indonesia, who started selling their art there. But now there's actually games that are building on top of it, right? Because it's cards, it's actually a really good form factor for games to use. So they sell it on this marketplace kind of through this community, and then you can use it in other games, right? So you already have this kind of one layer of composability between the kind of this direct thing and some game or some other interaction with these NFTs. And I think like that's a really cool thing, where NFTs start to interact with each other kind of across boundaries, right? Where like one of the things I wrote was, it's called NFT alchemy, where you can actually bring to NFTs and bind them together and make them into one NFT, which has effects of both things, right?
Oh,
And so
wow.
this way you can like have a game and maybe a drawing, and you bind like some effects from the game to the drawing, and now you sell this thing and it's more valuable because it kind of has like unique, unique image with unique effect coming together. So there's a lot of like things that you can, I mean, and this is just a simple idea, right? Like how to, put two things together. What if there's like, a whole like program that responds like how things operate depending on what you have and depending what maybe what people in your DAO have, and stuff like this, right? Like maybe based on what DAO have accumulated sounds NFTs, and now depending on the set that they have, like they can access to some maybe new deals that are appearing in some other DAO. So like all of this kind of like in a way this is what, yeah, you mentioned metaverse before, like that's what metaverse like ideas were, right? If you read any of the kind of books around this um, around this topic. And so one, the other kind of recently launched is Mintbase, which actually allows anyone to create their own marketplace, right? So this is like almost, I call it for people in China, I call it a Taobao of of NFTs,
Hmm.
or like kind of pretty much you can create your own store and create items there and start selling them, and like potentially you can create your own front end for the store if, and then and kind of it's all powered by their infrastructure. So you can see how like there's layers of things that being built out, and then people will be experimenting and seeing like, oh, what if we put physical and digital, what if we create two things digitally and merge them together, what if we like combine them via some other program and stuff like this. And then beyond just kind of like gamification, there's also like the real world, the finances, all those things that like, oh, what if we wrap this NFT into a, like it's a financial instrument, like the NFT itself in this financial instrument, then we put it for sale, or we make a collateral out of it and stuff like this. So kind of I think like as people as it becomes easier to make these things, as it becomes easier to really kind of play with them, there'll be more and more ideas how this can all things can play out together.
That's exciting. And you described kind of some of the metaverse books, and but what I'd love to get from you are like your sources of inspiration. So how whether they be blockchain or non-blockchain, like where do you get your energy? Like how do you what are you excited about right now? It can be professional or personal. Just looking for your a little bit about what gets you excited these days.
Yeah. So one thing actually I find pretty exciting is just reading some of the things that were written in like 14, 15, 16 in this ecosystem. Because I think back then people were not as honestly blinded by money. And so there was a lot more kind of ideas, like just people were, thinking about ideas going
Yeah.
forward. And so I think that's one of the things to find like kind of some inspiration, like
Wow.
before, too much money came into the industry. Um, the other thing that it's kind of inspiring in a in a negative way is I do watch a lot of like John Oliver style
Yeah.
shows, right? Because I mean he's very good at like kind of digging into the problems, but you just see how inefficient and how like terrible some of the things are because like structurally they're built as monopolies. Structurally they like he always refers to like some regulators to pretty much come in to solve it, but like we know that regulators don't are not able to do it. And so like things like that is really I think a good example of like inspiration for, hey, we need to solve these problems. It's not just us inventing stuff from there's actual problems with real people who are really get affected like in real world, and like we have tools now to solve them, right? So like we need to kind of keep building to a level where normal people can use this actually, and then actually give them this as like products and solutions.
I really enjoyed your answer because it kind of contains sort of personal carrots and personal sticks, right? So in a sense, you have both, right? You have this thing of like, oh, we have to stop this badness, and then it's sort of, oh, but there's this coolness here over here, So you kind of have both your the excitement of something cool, but also this challenge of something that isn't going as well. I think it's great because obviously, it can't just be about sort of building a fantasy world. Like we have to deal with the world, and there are a lot of problems. So I think that's a really cool that's a cool approach. I think John Oliver did quite a send up of blockchains, so he's not necessarily a big fan, but but I agree. It's he's definitely a good. I think comedy is a great source of information because they just have to study and observe the world, right? Because in a way, that's
Exactly, yeah.
the nature of
They just
comedy.
they
They
just
have to
present the
say,
world in a fun way, but like at the end, it's the same problem, right? That otherwise maybe you wouldn't be willing to spend time and like kind of digging in.
well, and there has to be truth in it, otherwise it's not good. It's bad comedy, right? Like if it's just a bunch of
Exactly, yeah.
fiction, then there's no value in it. I think part of it is really about people describing things as they are, and in a way, part of the humor is how ridiculous once you start
The
describing things
reality
as
is,
they
yeah.
are, yeah, then you're like, wow, that is just so unbelievable, that this is how things are, and that's where the energy comes from. So I think it's a great source of inspiration and really interesting. I guess the thing I'd love to dig into is, kind of roadmap things, right? So, what are the big kinds of excitements coming up in the roadmap? Like, how do you see the development of the platform?
For sure, yeah. I think kind of one big arc is definitely Aurora. So Aurora is
Yeah,
kind of a separate project now that is focused purely on bringing on boards as EVM projects, kind of Solidity projects,
wonderful.
and then they have a bunch of traction, but there's a pretty big roadmap of things to kind of launch there as well, and so that's super exciting. We have a lot of interesting stuff on the protocol side. It's maybe not as interesting to kind of mass person, but for geeks and kind of people who are
For
interested in
sure.
like resharding, expanding number of validators, kind of like we have a lot of optimizations that are coming to actually make things even cheaper than they are right now. So all of that things is
How do you
and like we're
reason
publishing
about
that.
sharding? Like how do you think about sharding? And
In what
what's
sense?
resharding? I'm curious about the roadmap item. So I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
want to
yeah.
geek out just a little bit.
For sure, yeah. So for background, so Near is kind of a sharded blockchain. That's
Yep.
really our focus for scalability, and uh, like we've built it with sharding in mind. There's actually sharded testnets running, but the mainnet right now runs with one shard, and that was kind of a conscious decision so we can launch it, and we don't actually have yet enough load
Yeah,
for
yeah.
more than one shard.
Very cool.
Now we have testnets, we have everything, but one of the interesting steps is actually going from one shard to more shards, right? Because you actually need to split the state and do all those things. And so that's where kind of one of the interesting questions about blockchain design is actually how do you design things in a way where you don't shoot yourself in the foot for future, right? Where you don't when you don't build something that like later you'll be like, oh, why did we do this? And so a
Yes.
lot of kind of design goes into like what will we want later, right? How will be like future of the protocol look in like 3, 5, 10 years, so that we can actually build it now, like with that in mind. And so one of the things that we realized that we were not thinking before, so kind of in general, Near was designed to be like kind of each shard is the same, and we like can fluidly move things between shards. And what we realized is there will be demand for kind of a almost like a separate shard capacity, right? So some contracts or some applications will want to say like, hey, I want my own shard, don't put anybody else here. And so, for example, Aurora is a good example of it because like Aurora on its own will probably have a big load, and so they will want to kind of have their own dedicated capacity. And again, this is like if you think of AWS, it's like the same idea of like, hey, I want a dedicated, hardware. Like
Yep.
I'm willing to pay a little bit more for longer. And
Sure.
so what we kind of designed originally, we right now adjusting to support this ability to like allocate dedicated shards for dedicated applications while still have number of shards that are kind of more fluid and things can move around between them. And so that's kind of like I would say like a two factor system. And then while we're thinking about it, well, it's like actually, do we need to have a third type, right? If we already have two, like where it's two, there may be three. And so like now, like, okay, how do we create it in such a way that if we do end up needing more, like we have a really easy way to do it, right? So again, like maybe we need a smart contract that does this coordination, and then the smart contract can easily be upgraded later by the governance, by the community vote. And so kind of all that, like building up like logic layer, right? That is,
Yep.
future proof in a good way. That's been the kind of the interesting challenge, and at the same time, like, very rewarding work from kind of the protocol side.
That's interesting. So it's sort of related in some level to sort of provisioning, right? So it's sort of
Yeah, it's pretty much
manages.
like a load balancing. Yeah, it's a load
Yep.
balancing and like dedicated capacity load balancing problem, but
Yep.
it's a little bit like complicated, obviously, in the blockchain world, where like some things are observed, some things are not, and like how do you like make predictions about things that are not, you know
Can you
that are
deal?
not full.
I'm sorry. Can you deal with things like sort of the cost of dedicated capacity versus shared capacity? Because it feels like those are trade-offs that might be made at the application layer.
So it will be more on a like market kind of place layer, right? So like people will kind of bid for dedicated capacity, right? And then like, because you need more validators so to actually run more things in parallel.
I like this. I like this quite a lot. So, one thing I wanted to ask you about is you were talking about alchemy, and this ability to kind of perform composability at the NFT layer effectively in the data, right? So, to me, the thing that's very interesting becomes that if you go back into the history of the Flow blockchain, which is the Dapper Labs blockchain, they really actually ran into problems of composability, and they ultimately decided against sharding for that reason, right? So, and the composability problems are actually very similar to the ones you described with alchemy, where one of the initial problems was an application called hats on cats, right? So it's basically you have a crypto kitty and then you put a hat on the cat, right? And so in a sense, this spawned a lot of thinking on their part about design space where sharding, right, it sort of affected composability, right? So it sounds to me like you've taken a different approach, but that you may be able to solve the problem in a similar in a different layer, right? So you may have composability, where you have shards that aren't really. And the other thing that you alluded to was kind of the idea of shards accessing state across shards. So I'm kind of trying to grapple with sort of these design choices.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just say sharding is complicated.
Yes,
So like the choice that Flow made is, there is a really good reasoning behind it, and it is that, yeah, when you have a sharded infrastructure, um, some things become harder. And so the
for
choice
sure.
we made is like, we believe in sharding because it allows you to kind of scale out. Uh, and to facilitate it, we have a asynchronous communication between contracts. So what
Yeah,
this means is that where in Ethereum and many other blockchains, when you call a contract, when you call some other contract from your contract, and when that executes, you get the result back. This is all atomic. And so if something fails there, your whole transaction kind of reverts and you get this. And on Near, this is not true. On Near, it's more like web services in the normal world, where like one web service get called, that web service can call other web services and get result back later. And so if something fails on those web services, you kind of need to decide what to do with it yourself. So as a developer, you kind of need to write a little bit more logic around those
yeah,
cases.
for sure.
And so some use cases are harder, some
Yep.
use cases are actually easier, because now you can do a lot more. Like, you can actually implement like map reduce style thing, where you can
Yep.
say like, oh, go do like 20 things and then collect back results. So but it's definitely true that some composability of applications become a little bit harder, and you need
Yep.
different standards around this. And so we actually have different standards for fungible token, where we went away from approval process, which is what Ethereum is using, and replaced it with a callback process, where you're saying, hey, transfer 20 tokens to that exchange, and then call that exchange with these arguments, right? And so this happens kind of like, you don't need to do two transactions actually anymore. You just call once, and then that will happen after. Same for NFTs. Like, there's a lot more kind of different things that happen underneath NFTs. Now for user, this actually means that some things are actually simpler, because now you don't need to do like two transactions, for example.
Yeah.
So there's like, pros and cons for some of the stuff. And so at the end, right, you're just designing applications now for the user to kind of hide some of this complexity. And then for developer, we're just, making patterns and making kind of libraries to, again, like wrap around the asynchronicity in a way that they can easily manage.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, with respect to kind of dreaming about the future, I think we touched a little bit on kind of the creation of the metaverse. You talked about the passion economy, which is exciting, and you talked about sort of people in anywhere, including India and Philippines and Indonesia, kind of contributing value to this kind of like distributed economy. But I would love to kind of get your vision. I mean, we also talked a little bit about the dark and the light side, or the carrot and the stick. So I'd love to kind of get your big picture future vision. So, it sounds like, if you think about the 10-year span, a lot of things can change, so I'd love to get your, you know, kind of your dream picture, or, the big picture.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I think the kind of the big picture is this shift of control, right? So where people can actually control their own, money. That's what, that also crypto is offering, but also data and governance of this kind of applications that you're using. And through that, right, you have this kind of very much interoperable world where you can go from one place to another. Like the example of like a social network, right? Right now you go to Facebook, then you go to LinkedIn, and you need to like build up your new graph again from scratch. But like in a world where I own my data, right? I go to Facebook, I go to LinkedIn, like they know exactly the same friends because this is my data. And then you control, who has access to this data and when you can be shown which ads. And also what this means is also the world will become actually, somebody mentions this, it's called cheaper than free, right? This, what community owned is actually now you owning this protocol, you owning this application to some extent, right? While using it, while kind of being able to become not just like participant, but also like earn from, your creation of the content of the participation that you create, of the network effects you create. And so I think like that's a really big shift of, and I think we still need to like, flesh out how this will work, what applications will be around it, but kind of this idea of, user in the center and, protocols around that kind of surface like the users, kind of assets and data and everything. And then through that, they can interact with the world and with each other through these DAOs, communities, etc. And like
Yeah.
businesses from this perspective is not that different. Business is just, a different type of user, but like at the end, it's kind of very similar idea.
Yeah, I mean, I love the vision. For me, like, it is very much about kind of this consent world and ownership world, right? So it's very much moving from an economy that's largely extractive to one that's largely driven by ownership, right? And I think that you've gone perhaps even one step forward from there, right? Which is the idea of passion, right? Because obviously, the thing that I think happens energetically when people have ownership is they start to feel their power, right? And
Excited,
I
yeah,
think
passion, yeah, passionate
yeah,
about this, yeah.
yeah, and in a
Yeah,
sense they
there's actually,
also can express their uniqueness. Yeah. Anyhow, please go ahead.
oh no, I just wanted to mention there's a really cool example which is a taxi company in Toronto that used crypto to award its drivers, where like for pretty much for every mile or whatever you drive, you got some little bit of the token, which is a free,
Wow.
like is a revenue stream, like a portion of revenue stream
Yeah.
of the whole company. And drivers were so excited about this, and they were so adamant that they actually like they were selling everyone on using this service, right? And
I
it
love it.
beat Uber
I
in
love it.
like very quickly because just like everybody was excited to join this like kind of ownership mentality. And so I think, yeah, just this idea, right? I mean, like we see this right now in DeFi and kind of a little bit, I would say, like exuberated way. But I think like this applied to like, more interesting use cases will become really powerful kind of
I mean, I
drivers.
I think if you look at the degen movement and you look at things like Wall Street Bets and AMC and GameStop and this kind of stuff, like the application is kind of mob rule and it's a little bit of flexing, where people are flexing power, and it's very degen, right? It's not necessarily optimistic. But the thing that I think is central to all of these things is the coordination of distributed action. Right. And I think that if we have better coordination frameworks and better communication and better understanding, then people will choose infrastructures that serve them the best. Right. And I think people need to learn and they need to kind of act in their own best interests as opposed to just like following, whatever Elon Musk says. So yeah, I think
Sure, yeah.
that's a path to a brighter future, which is people learning what's best for themselves and feeling their own power. So I'm excited about the future vision that you're painting.
Awesome.
Well, good. Thanks so much.
Let's make it happen.
Yes, it's been a tremendously exciting show. So I really appreciate you coming on and, thanks. Welcome back anytime.
Yeah, I appreciate inviting. Thanks.
Thank you very much.